If you're like us, you've probably seen references to something called Munchausen's by proxy and been curious, without really understanding what it is or how it may affect people. That's why we were excited to hear about the new podcast, Nobody Should Believe Me.
The host, novelist Andrea Dunlop, takes an in-depth look at this subject. No one has ever done this before. She talks with people who have been affected by this condition. She even speaks with a perpetrator.
We've already listened to the first 2 episodes, and we can tell you that Andrea doesn't dwell on the darkness. She takes great pains not to be gory or exploitative. This show has heart. It focuses on the humanity of everyone involved.
And what makes this podcast extra special is that Andrea has a deeply personal connection to this subject. Someone very close to her was investigated for Munchausen by proxy. That gives the show a real emotional punch. When Andrea is listening to people tell stories about how they've been affected by this condition, she is not some uninvolved outsider. She has lived through the very same pain they have. She understands them. And through this podcast, she helps all of us understand them too.
New episodes drop every Thursday. Listen and subscribe to Nobody Should Believe Me on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Content warning. This episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls. Anyone who follows the Delphi murders will remember the night of December 6th, 2021, when the Indiana State Police released a confusing statement asking for information from people who had communicated with the Anthony Shots social media account. The very next day, Wish TV reporter Demie Johnson revealed the crucial detail that the ISP held back, that the Anthony Shots account was linked to an Indiana man named Kegan Kline. It was one of many great stories Demi did on the Delphi case. More recently, you may have seen an interview she did with Carrie Timmons, the mother of Liberty German, in which Carrie revealed she has lost faith in the ability of law enforcement to bring this case to a conclusion. Demi has now left Wish TV and is preparing to move to Orlando, Florida, where she will be working for WFTV. Before she left Indiana, she agreed to speak with us about her experiences covering this case, including just how she got that scoop about Kegan Kline. My name is Anya Kane.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee.
And this is The Murder Sheet, a weekly true crime podcast.
Anya and I connected over the Burger Chef murders, a 1978 unsolved case involving the killings of 4 young restaurant employees.
Now we're looking to track restaurant homicides. To help us understand the patterns of these crimes, we created a spreadsheet of nearly 1,000 eatery-related killings, the Murder Sheet. We'll be drawing on that data throughout Season 1 to give you a deep dive into undercovered crimes. We're the Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, a conversation with journalist Demie Johnson. Demi started by telling us about the beginning of her career in journalism.
It really started, during the whole Delphi situation. I was finishing up at Ball State, started working in West Lafayette at the CBS affiliate there, WLFI. And that station was, the only station in town at the time. I think they have a couple other things there now, but that we were the only ones. So, it was like, that's all we covered for several months. And it wasn't all in all the time, but it was something, seemed like at least every week we would be, checking in, following up, reaching out. And then after I spent 2 years there, which a lot unfolded, the 2019 sketch, presser, all of those different things happened during that time. I just moved to Indy, to Wish. And of course, we still covered it. So really, it was just taking my career from one part of the state to the other, but still really being all in on that case. And a lot of the connections I made, not just with law enforcement, but with families of the girls and friends of the girls, was during my time in West Lafayette. So I really have to give credit to that, because had I not been there working in the community that people in Delphi were comfortable with, I probably would have never made those connections that I was able to use to help uncover things in the case during my time at Wish.
And you were on the ground, as you said, in West Lafayette, this time, and from what you saw there and what you've seen since, could you speak a bit to, what this case has meant to the community there?
Honestly, I just got chills, but honestly, it was scary for people because nobody knew anything. Nobody knew what happened. They just knew that two girls, two teenagers, went outside because it was nice out, and then nobody could find them. And then when they did, they were dead. So people were scared. And every time you went to Delphi, I always said it felt like almost like it was the day after the murders. It was always eerie for several years. And I don't feel like, in my opinion, I don't feel like that changed until maybe last year. When I went back, it kind of seemed like things were bright and back to normal and people were kind of living life. But there's always a reminder because the posters are up, the girls' photos are up. So it's just this constant fear, I think, that people are living with, the fear of the unknown, not knowing who did it and if he's still out there, if he's working at a shop down the street, or if he's going to the grocery store with you every day. I think there's still some uneasiness in the community for sure.
And then I guess, would you be able to speak to some of your journalistic methods and sort of like what your process was and covering these cases throughout, the different outlets you've worked at, but like what sort of things would you do to make sure you're staying on top of it, getting scoops, things like that?
I would say in the very, very beginning, a lot of information I got, which wasn't much, but a lot of information I got was just from the community and the families, just staying in touch with them, checking in with them, not even for the story, but just to make sure that they're okay. And they would say, hey, just letting you know, we heard this, don't know if you can check into it. Then over time, I think there were a couple of agents, some of them are now retired, some of them are still on the case, who kind of noticed that I was always calling. I was always calling the state police post. How many tips have you received? What do you know? Have you learned anything? And it was like probably once a month I would do that. And they would usually say no, they wouldn't tell me anything new. And I think a couple of them noticed that I was not going to go away, and they appreciated it, and they started to share things with me. And that led to me looking into other things. And it was all, legal by the book, just looking into documents in different counties, looking into names of certain people. And then in 2019 at Wish, I covered something with the Larry Nassar case. So I got to know a couple FBI agents pretty well who worked with the Child Sex Crimes Unit. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but they were on that unit. So they were familiar with the Larry Nassar case and the Delphi case, all kind of went hand in hand. And they investigated, social media accounts, things like that. So then some of those agents shared things with me. And that's really how a lot of the things I uncovered with the Kagan Klein profile, the Anthony Schatz profile made by Kagan Klein. That's how all of that kind of happened. It's just by me hearing something and then looking into it and then finding the documents to back up whatever they said.
We want to ask you, because this was for us sort of the moment that we learned so much more about this case, and for everyone really. And it was some of your reporting in December, revealing, who the Anthony Shots account was linked to, this person, Kagan Klein. And that blew our minds. That was an incredible scoop. So major props, but also, is there anything more you can tell us about how you got that, huge piece of news that has really sort of the reverberations of with have kind of echoed throughout the case ever since?
Without going into too much detail, I can just say that more than one source shared the name Kagan Klein with me. And then I looked him up, and all of that part blew my mind. All of the information was right there. And I said, how did nobody find this 5 years ago? But that's what happened. I just searched his name in Indiana My Case, which is something anyone can do. And everything that I needed to know was there. So.
Well done.
Very well done. Did the police give you any blowback about releasing that Kagan Klein information?
No, I wouldn't say that. They just wouldn't answer any questions about it, which I'm sure you guys know. You've done the same thing I have, reached out, asked questions. And I said, I know that it was the day after they put the Anthony Shots information out. I said, I know who made that account, and I know he's been in jail for all these years. Do you want to set the record straight? If not, I'm going to put his name out and I'm going to put the story out. And they just said, we're not going to comment. So to me, that meant go ahead.
And you mentioned it kind of earlier. It seems like, you've been great about getting some law enforcement sources and having that. Overall, what has been the law enforcement reaction to your reporting in general? Has it been generally supportive, or has there been blowback? Is it kind of a mix?
I would say it's been kind of a mix. Nobody has said anything to me that has been, unprofessional or told me not to do something. I think the bigger issue has just been the silence. It's just been, we're not going to say anything, or they just don't respond at all. And when they do that, then it's like, we tried, but you didn't say anything. So if you're not going to say anything, we're going to. And I think something that I've thought about for a long time with the Anthony Shots and the Kagan Klein stuff, to me, I really contemplated keeping that to myself and not putting it out at all. But to me, it helped the community, because for so many years, you had families who were afraid to let their kids play outside because they thought that there was just a random killer killing kids. And that wasn't the case. And I don't know, I'm not in law enforcement, so I don't know what the method behind keeping that profile secret for 5 years. I don't know how that's going to help them, because I've heard that it's only given them more tips and more leads and more victims and more people. So, to me, I feel like that was important for the community to know. And I think they should have known five years ago.
When those memories might have been more fresh, if you're a teenager who's talking with someone sketchy online and, maybe you're putting two together, but maybe then you go off to college and you forget all about that.
Yeah, do you have any insights as to why they kept that information under wraps for so long?
I don't. And I've been trying to figure that out. And the stuff that you guys uncovered with, the Ron Logan stuff as well. I just don't know why they would wait. I've heard rumors, and these are only rumors, that part of it was to protect the girls' image because they were young, and people in law enforcement didn't want them to look bad because they were talking to someone online. But those are just rumors. So I don't know if that's true.
Right. And in terms of, one thing that we've noticed in particular is just the public reaction to this case. You mentioned people not wanting their kids to play outside. There's also this huge online community that's arisen looking for answers. What's been your experience with that, and what, the public reception to some of your reporting and you digging into this?
Some people have been really thankful. This makes sense. This answers this question. Now I know this. Now I understand that. But just like you guys, I've had, people say really nasty things too. Like, why are you sharing this if police never shared this? And, this isn't appropriate. And some of the other things that people have said have been a little bit more mean, but it's just that happens with every story. I think the difference with this one is it really does have global attention. It's not just people in Indiana who care. There are people all over the world who are trying to solve this case on their own every day.
The kind of the online sleuthing community is all over it. And one thing you mentioned, and we've heard that a lot, there's this perception perhaps that the media outlets and the police need to be in lockstep with everything. And, as a journalist, as someone who's worked in a variety of different outlets, what's your thought on that? And sort of how do you sort of explain to people that, separation in that sphere is perhaps, more ideal?
I do think that there are things with this case in particular that police could be more transparent about, because at this point, it's been 5 years. A year into it, I can understand them holding some things back and not sharing things. But I think after all of this time, they have to answer some questions. Like, we don't even know why there are two different sketches. There's so many things that people just want to know. And I think that if they could clear it up and we could help them clear it up and explain it, then maybe people would know how to help police. And that's just my opinion and my thoughts, and being someone who's looked at it for so long. I don't think the media needs to know everything. I've never thought that. But I do think that we need to hold people accountable. And if they're withholding information that could help the public help them, that's a problem. And it seems like that's been the case when you think about the social media profile, the sketches, and all of the unanswered questions about why and what did you find that made you change your mind, and why hold this profile back and share this name but not tell us that someone's already in jail for it, especially if they don't believe he's connected, which is what they have said. I don't know. I just think that, being able to go to the media and say, hey, this is what you should say, and this is how you can say it. You're not going to hurt the case, but still keeping things back for the investigation. I mean, to me, that's part of being a good police officer.
One thing I wanted to ask you, going back to the Kegan Kline news that you broke, how did that scoop affect your understanding of the case?
Honestly, it just blew my mind, because when you see what police put out, you see his charges, and you find out that there was, communication and that he did talk to the girls, you're like, it had to be him, right? And you read the documents, and it talks about, them tracking the IP address to his house the day of the murders, and the different conversations they had. And you look at it and you're like, how is it not this guy? So I think for me, that was tough. But then, credit to you guys, the Ron Logan thing makes it seem like the FBI is looking one way and state police are looking another way. And none of it makes sense now.
Yeah, I think our what we found is that, I think the Ron Logan thing's interesting as a snapshot of where they were in March 2017. But then I think your reporting really brings us more to the modern day of like 2020 onward. What's the focus? It's Kegan Kline,
right.
And that's been our understanding. But
there's been a lot of speculation online about, virtually every aspect of this case. And one thing I've seen speculated is that the entire reason Indiana State Police even made a statement about the Anthony Schatz profile and did it, late in the evening, was because you already had that scoop and were preparing to run it. Is that true?
Not entirely, no. I've known for a long time that the girls were communicating with someone, but I didn't know who. I didn't know the extent of the profile. I didn't know the name of who, and I didn't know someone was already in jail. But I had been told, and that's something that's always been so shocking to me, is the families didn't even know. Families didn't even know that the girls were talking to anyone and planning to meet with someone. And I always ask them, I'm like, does that bother you that police haven't told you all of these things about the day they were murdered, the moments leading up to their murders? They're like, no, we trust them. And that's good. That's good to have that relationship between the families and law enforcement. But I just think if I were in their shoes, I would want to know everything. And I don't know. I think that part has always really, really bothered me. Like, why not tell them that they were talking to someone online? Because maybe the family knew something about, maybe one of the girls had been in trouble for it before. I don't know. You never know.
Or there were some warning signs, perhaps, like secrecy or something going on that, in hindsight, oh, now I can connect the dots.
Right.
Yeah, I'm curious to get your take on sort of, if you're leaving Indiana. If you weren't, though, are there any angles or kind of lines of questioning that you'd sort of perhaps, as a reporter want to be going down or kind of have on the horizon for what you would do next?
Yeah, I think the biggest two questions, and they're ones that the three of us have asked before, is I would want to know why they waited to search Ron Logan's property, because think about all of the evidence that someone could cover up in that time. And then why they waited with Kagan Klein. What was the point of waiting? He was free for 3 years. They interviewed him. He admitted, yeah, I made this account. Yeah, I did all of these things on this account. And then they didn't arrest him. So what do they have that makes them law enforcement, that makes them not want to go after him harder or to just let him walk free for all of those years? And what do they have that makes them think there's no possible way that Ron Logan's property could have played a role besides that's just where the bodies were found?
There seemed to be an awful lot of unexplained delays in this case. And I think we're really interested in that angle too of, especially in the case of Kagan Klein, you have somebody where you have them seemingly dead to rights for child sexual abuse materials. So really raises questions about, why isn't he being brought in on that alone, in 2017 as opposed to 2020?
I guess the other thing I just thought of is, who else are they looking at? Because I was told in the very beginning when I learned about Kagan Klein that he's not the guy. He just knows who it is or is part of it. So to me, it's like, who do they know it is, or who do they think it is? And why can't they go after that person? What's missing? And was it a mistake by law enforcement? Did they make mistakes along the way?
Are there any widespread misunderstandings about the case that you've encountered during the time that you have reported on it?
I would say it's only been things that law enforcement has said versus what the media has said. And sometimes it's just, again, law enforcement not answering questions and not saying anything. And then the media finds something out. We report it, we put it out. And then people are like, there's no way this can be true. Wish TV doesn't know what they're talking about. But when you have the documents and the paper trail, I think that's been the biggest thing. It's just, I've told state police that even if you can't say anything, you need to come out and say, we can't say anything on camera, because it looks really bad every time we uncover something and nobody says anything, because it makes it seem like, I don't know, I think it makes the community lose confidence, and that's the opposite of what they should want. But again, I'm not in law enforcement. I don't know what their method is. So yeah.
You spoke recently with Liberty German's mother, and she seems to have lost confidence in the police.
Yeah, she told me that that started for her the day they called off the search. So they didn't find the girls' bodies that day, or the girls, we didn't know they were dead yet. They called off the search, and she said, if they were out there and they're going to lay out there for 24 hours and we don't find them, we're not going to ever know what happened. And she said nobody really listened, and she felt like, I want to stay out and keep searching all night. And she said law enforcement said, there's no reason to. So she told me it started then, but then she started to have some hope when things would come out, like the sketches, different press conferences. She said every time police would talk, I would feel a little better. She said then they stopped talking. Then they would release something, but they wouldn't answer questions. And then the media would say one thing, and then police wouldn't say anything. And she said, at this point, I don't have faith. I don't think that they're going to get it done. She told me that she thinks it's going to take the work of journalists or possibly a private investigator to get it done. But she said that she doesn't think that a private investigator could ever be successful because state police will not share information with them. She said she's looked into hiring one before.
Well, you know this investigation and the people working on it better than almost anyone. Do you feel confident in the job they're doing?
That's a tough question. I think I do. I feel confident in the work they're doing, but I do think that there have been mistakes made that I don't know if we'll ever know what those are. I don't know if we'll ever get the answers to them, but that's what, if I were still working in Indiana, that's what I would be trying to figure out, is who messed what up, where, and how. Because the timeline doesn't make sense.
No, and
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, when you look at, just again, the focus of the investigation in 2017, it was the property owner, it was Ron Logan, but it was also this social media profile. And if you have this social media profile that one group is looking into, and you have the property owner that the FBI is looking into, and then nothing happens to either of them, and then 3 years later they go back and they arrest the guy for the social media profile, it just doesn't add up. It's like, what were they doing in the middle of that time? And what did they have that made them speculate one or the other way? And what didn't they have that didn't allow them to arrest both of them? I don't know. To me, there are a lot of things that just don't line up.
We were wondering if you had any for journalists who are covering the case on what to look for, or what to avoid doing, any sort of tips or thoughts or insights about that.
Well, number one is just be respectful to the families. I mean, not only do I always ask law enforcement, do you have a problem with this? I also ask the families, because there are things that they don't want to know, and they don't want to see, and they don't want to find out by watching the news. And usually if police know we're going to put something out, they let the family know, which is good. But I think being respectful is huge. In terms of finding sources and finding information, I'm not going to lie, I feel like those days are over in this case, because I think you can still find information. And I think we have enough information now where things are going to unfold on their own, just by you guys looking into it, other people looking into it. But I feel like, I was told that all of the detectives who were originally on the case, there may be only one or two still on it. They replaced the whole team. So that's hard, because you don't have any of those original people who might be frustrated and might go to the media and say, hey, you should put this information out. Because that's how some of these big stories, get broken, is someone in law enforcement is frustrated and they want the world to know that they are working and hear all these things they do know. So I think with that, it doesn't hurt to stay on top of it. It doesn't hurt to constantly call and check in and say, hey, can you tell me how many, even if it's simple, how many tips do you have? How many tips are you looking into right now? And just being friendly and showing that you care. I think people will respect that and share information with you when the time is right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those angles that I said are the most important right now, just trying to figure out what's missing and why. I don't know. And I guess kind of going off on a tangent, but I guess the other thing is like with the Kagan Klein situation and the Anthony Schatz profile, it really does seem like they're looking at two people, at least, maybe more. And if they're looking at two people and they have proof that one phone was in one location the day of the murders, one computer device was in another, how can they not figure out who was at each place at that time? I don't know. So I think it's important too to go back and reread things a lot. That's something I did toward the end of my time is I would go back and reread all of the documents, all of the arrest documents, and just say like, what is missing here and who could this be and how could this be? So I think it's like school. You just got to keep studying and keep reaching out.
One final question, just, actually kind of a two-parter. Basically, what do you think this case needs to get solved? And then also, if you could speak to what the case means to you personally, having covered it for so long.
So I think that at this point, unless there's some big piece of information that I don't know about, it probably is going to take an admission of guilt. Either somebody comes forward and says, I did it, or somebody says, hey, I know that it was this person because I have this proof. To me, that's the point we're at, unless law enforcement has information that they're just not putting out, which I'm sure they do. So that's where my head is at. I don't want it to be there. I want it to be like, no, we have this person and we're just missing this one thing. But I just am at a point where I'm like, I don't know. I think that someone is going to have to know something, someone who's not in law enforcement. And they're going to have the courage to go to law enforcement and say, here's what I know. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but that's just where I'm at this point. I feel like I've hit like all of the dead ends. And I don't know, maybe when I don't work in Indiana anymore and somebody gets mad again, they'll call me and I'll be able to understand it all. And then I'll call you. But at this point, it's just kind of like, I don't know where it's going or where it could go. And I would say it's been hard to cover it. Like I always told myself in the beginning, like, it's easy when you get big breaks and you're covering a big story to kind of take it all in and feel proud of yourself and be happy with the work you've done. But to me, I always said, you don't want to be that person because these are real people who lost their children and they're never going to get to go to prom. They're never going to get to graduate high school. They're never going to go to college. And just remember that even though you're getting all this attention and all these pats on the back, there are people sitting in their house right now just totally losing it because, once again, their kids' murders are constantly in the news. They can't escape it, even if they want to. And I think that, it's been hard. It's always been a very emotional struggle. I would go to work. I'd be really excited. I have this new information. I was going to put it out, and then I'd come home and I would just cry because I'm like, should I have done that? Am I hurting someone? Am I making it harder for police to solve the case? So I think it's very emotional work. And I think that's important for journalists to remember. But always stick to your guns. And if you feel like something isn't right, then look into it, because that's kind of how I felt. Somebody wasn't saying something and somebody was law enforcement, and it's their job to answer questions, and they can do it in a way where they don't ruin the case. So I don't know. It's been very like back and forth, very emotional. Some days feels good, some days it doesn't. And yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. I'm sure you guys have felt similar sometimes.
Definitely.
Yeah, this has been emotional. Yeah, it's been a lot, more so than any other case almost.
Yeah, I've said that. I've said to just people in my family and friends that usually I can go to work, do my job, turn it off, and remember that, I have to do it again the next day. But this one is definitely different. And I don't know if it's because everybody around the world is waiting for us to answer their questions, and then at the same time they're there, criticizing everything we did. I don't know what it is, but I think also just the sensitivity of two young girls, and they were, I hate to use words like this, but they were brutally murdered. And I think it's just scary for people to think about what happened and how it happened and why it happened.
We want to thank Demi for taking the time to speak with us this week, even as she was busily preparing to move to Florida. She has done terrific work on this case, and we wish her the best of luck on the next stage of her career at WFTV in Orlando.
If you have information that you'd like to share with us about Logan, the Kleins, or the Delphi case in general, then email murdersheet@gmail.com. We protect our sources.
If you need to get in contact with police about this case, email your tip to abbyandlibbytip at cacoshrf.com or call the tip line at 765-822-3535.
To our surprise, we've gotten a number of requests from people saying they would like a way to help financially support our efforts with the show. So, if you are interested, we are relaunching a Patreon page, which you can find at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. Join us there for 2 live video question and answer sessions each month. You can ask us anything, suggest new cases for us to look at, or even offer ideas for new leads for us to follow. If Patreon is not your thing, you can buy us a coffee at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. Thanks for the interest.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Murder Sheet. As always, thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
To keep up with the latest on The Murder Sheet, please make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Murder Sheet, and on Facebook at MSheet Podcast, or by searching Murder Sheet. If you enjoy listening to The Murder Sheet, please leave us a 5-star review to help us gain more exposure. And send tips, suggestions, and feedback to murdersheet@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening.